All right. So I was sharing the way that we originally got connected, which has probably been 5 or 6 years ago at this point, and how I found that I was kind of making the same mistakes over and over. And my wife was like, I think you should probably hire a coach at this point. And so I reached out to some mutual friends and asked for their recommendation. And a couple people responded back saying, you need to talk to Randy, but I can't explain him to you because he's completely non-conventional. You're just going to have to meet him. And of course, that was all I needed to hear because I fancy myself to be non-conventional. And so we met, and sure enough, you are in fact not non-conventional, and I still don't know how to appropriately describe you. So I guess for the sake of other people who are here, how would you describe what it is that you do?
You know, the people have asked me over the years, what's my style? And I used to say, I just do what works, okay? But that wasn't specific enough. So I talk about really meeting into their point of need. And I consider myself a modern day Renaissance person. So I'm studying just about everything I can about just about everything. And in fact, the best way for me to describe it is that, during the pandemic situation, I tried to figure out what was the best way for me to prepare, not only for dealing with it, but also dealing with people who are dealing with it. And I went back to high school, and I said, in high school, you had periods every day, from homeroom, and then first period, second period, and you studied different subjects. And so I put that together during the pandemic here. So I'm just like I'm in high school again. I'm studying each subject. It may be history, it may be something in technology, it may be something in philosophy and some biographies. I'm also studying kind of how to send messages, for example, called Tale to Win by Peter Gruber, that talk how you should frame story. All of those things do amalgamation. And I believe, especially information, is that you must take pieces of information, check them for a useful. And so that's what I do with my clients. So depending on your in, the thing I'll ask,
Hey, Randy.
one, what are they reading?
Hey, Randy, we're getting some like attenuation on your end. Maybe turn off your video.
Turn off the video. Okay.
Maybe that'll help.
Is that working better?
It is, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, as I said, my style is eclectic because I pride myself in being a sort of Renaissance person. And the only way to describe it is just describe what I've been doing during the pandemic. And I've been going back to my high school days where you had different periods and you studied different subjects throughout the day. And so I have, the first period might be studying the history of something, either a country or an industry or something like that. The second period might be my writing time when I'm writing my book. The third period is Spanish. Then I do a lot of work in Latin America, and I still take Spanish lessons to increase my vocabulary. And then the fourth thing will be like PE, so that's when I do my workouts. I grew up as one of 5 children in South Central Los Angeles. All of my, I was the fourth of 5, and all of my brothers went to attended liberal arts colleges prior to me going to school at Lewis and Clark College as an undergrad. And if anybody knows anything about liberal arts college, they teach you this 360-degree view of just anything, any part of life. And so I just kind of embraced that throughout my life, and I continue to do it to this day. And how that helps my clients is that just about anything that they've gone through or they're dealing with, I've had some study. I've got at least what I call a diagnostic level of proficiency, which means I understand the vocabulary, the common principles, and I can discern levels of complexity so that I know when I know when I'm over my head or that I have to get some expert involved. So consequently, what I do is meet people at their point of need, which means you have to lead with your ears. It's not it's not important for me to tell you how much I know. What's important is for me to listen to what you know and then see how that relates to what I can help you do.
Now, one of the lead domino things I think in your approach is this whole idea of playing your game.
Absolutely.
And of course, I've taken that on and run with it as well. Could you share kind of your perspective on that? And because I think it's a inflection point for some of the things that I wanted to chat with you about on this call today.
Well, I believe that everyone, irrespective of who their parents are or where they come from, has some unique attribute, something that they're good at, something that they even can be great at. And too many times, people are cut off early in life because either it's something that people don't agree with, or you can't make a living, or something that is not pragmatic enough for you to actually matriculate in school. And so consequently, we leave those things off. And as you get older, you say, I wish I could have stayed with the piano, say, or wish I could have stayed in sports, or, I was really good, but in math, but they made me change to something else. I take you back there and say, where were you when you were really in your element, when you really felt like you were in the zone? And let's stay there. Okay. Let's exploit that even so that you're constantly playing to your strengths. There's so many people talking about you should shore up your weaknesses. And I always look at that like that's a real problem, because unless it's something that is so egregious that it's going to prevent you from ever doing anything, you should be playing to your strengths more and more and more. And that's going to propel you to where you want to go.
Yeah, and one of I appreciate you sharing that perspective, and it's been, like I said, the underpinning of a lot of things that I've done over recent years, in particular around the whole notion of rigging the game. And what I think we talked about in the early days, and maybe of working together, and then in times when we sync up, is so you're a professor at Seattle U, which is a Jesuit school here in Seattle, aptly named.
Yes.
And I went to Seattle U, and I always say I'm not a Catholic, but I learned about Catholic guilt when I was, it became part of who I am to a degree by virtue of going to Seattle U, because there's so much built into the curriculum about what you should be doing and what it means. And there's a lot of what's right in that message, but I know that I left with this righteous indignation about what I should be doing. What does it mean to be a leader of a business, or what does it even mean to be an employee trying to grow your career? And it really took me out of playing my game, I think. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and then kind of talk about, because in these periods of uncertainty, well, actually, I'll pause there and I'll let you talk about your perspective on that, and then I'll add on.
Well, yeah. Actually, I'm not a Catholic either, but I play one during the day. The actual, when you think about the history of any domain that you're involved with, the first thing you need to understand is the history of the practice. And if you know the history of Jesuits, they were always, quote, breaking the rules. They were going in and they were teaching, they would perform the liturgies and the services in the native language. There's a great movie that Robert De Niro is in called The Mission. where the conquistadors in Latin America, they were called back because they wanted to teach in the native language instead of in Spanish. And they actually, the conquistadors actually came in and raided the churches and actually killed some of the Jesuits because they wouldn't go along. You think about the things like the Big Bang Theory that was actually developed by a Jesuit. And so these are things that break the mold. And yet sometimes we're teaching people to conform. And that's really not, from my perspective, that's not the Jesuit ethos. It's to go out and use what you find where you find it and to better the people around you. And so I think people get it twisted sometimes. We teach people to fill a slot and to be obedient. And yet that was never the Jesuit way back in the 1500s and beyond.
Hmm. So the whole notion, though, of playing one's game, I think, can be challenging because you have to want to understand what it is, because it's so individual. And then what I find, and what I've been sharing a lot in these daily calls, is this idea that as you grow your business and increase your cash flow, you want to be reducing risk simultaneously, and not and oftentimes it's the opposite, that folks are taking on more risk relative to the amount of gain that they're taking on. And all that uncertainty, all that volatility on a day-to-day basis is what often keeps them away from really playing their game, because they're reacting to these scenarios and such. Absolutely. So in other words, whenever there's uncertainty or volatility, it can push us out of what we want to be doing into what we think we should be doing. So what's your take on that, and how are you kind of staying in your game?
Well, here's the thing that I'd like to share with the audience, the people that are listening or watching this program, in the sense that the advice that I come up with is 2,500 years old, from Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. And he said, know yourself, know your enemy, and you can fight 100 battles without peril. And what happens so much is that people all of a sudden think they're a rock star when they're really not a rock star, or they're some kind of clairvoyant, and they can see the future because they've had some success in maybe some short-term success, or in one business they figured it out. Sun Tzu said, know yourself, know your enemy. So if you know your enemy is that you tend to get over your skis, or you get kind of puffed up when you've had some success, you have to either get with somebody who's going to bring that down, or you're going to have to recognize it and bring it down yourself, so that you can make rational decisions. Doesn't mean that you stop taking risks. It means that your risks are calculated based on how you're seeing things rationally. Now, the other thing he talked about 2,500 years ago is to be like water. And water conforms to the environment that it's in. If you put it in a cup, it becomes a cup. You put it in a teapot, it's a teapot. You put it in a bowl, it becomes a bowl. Put it in a glass, it becomes the glass. Okay. Sun Tzu said that 2,500 years ago, and people are still not getting the point. As this volatility happens, okay, the thing that I'm looking at is, well, I can't control a lot of it, but I can control me, and I can control how I am reacting. So if I hear some news that something is happening and there's going to be a catastrophe, I'm looking at that as, okay, has it happened? Is it happening? Is that something that I can do something about personally? Or do I just have to be like water and go with it until I see an opportunity? Now, I am not an investment counselor, so I say do the opposite of what I do, you may become a billionaire. But I'm looking at, say, securities that I thought were a good deal. Now they're 60% less than they were when I thought they were a good deal. Now, do I still believe that they were a good deal after doing all the research, after looking at it, all these things? Okay, the only variable that has changed is that we are in this pandemic. And then all of a sudden, those things don't look as attractive because everything doesn't look quite as attractive. To me, that's the time, just for Randy Massengale, not everybody else, that's the time to go into some of these that I've already researched and I wanted to buy more of anyway. It's kind of like they're on a fire sale, you know.
Yeah. Maybe taking a little bit of a pivot, but I would love to hear you talk about egalitarian versus stoicism, or stoic, and your perspective on that.
Well, yeah, I tend to go the Epicureans versus the
Oh, sorry.
Stoics.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Epicureans. Sorry.
Well, the Epicureans are the people that like the nice wines and they like the high life and they talk about great ideals and most of the time. And the Stoics are the ones that are, you know, they're studious. They actually are pragmatic. They follow through. And one of the things that the great historian Will Durant, who wrote the Story of Civilization, 10 volumes that took him 4 years per volume, over 40 years. But he said something when he talked about the life of Greece, that the Stoics have always ruled over the Epicureans, and they always will. And I see that in the sense that if you have never had to roll up your sleeves and go to work for a prolonged period of time, times like now where they take away a lot of the frills, I mean, you can have some money in your pocket now and you can't even spend it, okay, because you can't go anywhere to see what you want to spend it on. And if you did spend it, you can't go and you can't drive that new car down the street and show all your friends and stuff. But if you're stoic and you are saying, okay, what can I do during this period to improve myself? What can I do to get stronger? What can I do to help the people around me get stronger? Okay. And do I need all the frills? Do I need all the bells and whistles on everything that I'm doing? Or can I look at what I'm doing and say, I'm going to get better at it. I'm going to, at the end of this, I'm going to move the needle on myself. And that's what the Stoics do. And it's more self-accountability along with the accountability of those around you. But it's not just accountability to do something at a high level. It's accountability to do something starting at the grassroots and working your way up.
Yeah, I think we've had a couple of deep dive conversations before on why it is that the Stoics tend to long-term win relative to the Epicureans. Maybe for the benefit of the folks who are here, if you might kind of share a bit more about Epicureans. A lot of folks know about Stoicism now because it's become a little bit more mainstream, but just that term Epicurean and kind of the historical context, just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, back in Greece, I believe the origin of the word was a group of people that were dedicated to the good life, and so people would debate what is a good life, and most of the time it had something to do with having the better wine, the better food, the most be most learned, to be well traveled and see other cultures. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things, except when the emotional stamina it takes to do things at the grassroots level, like where we are today, it becomes very difficult to cope. So the Epicureans would be in office and they had the good life, and the Stoics would be out teaching and plowing fields and making sure that they had the provisions. And then when a famine would come or some downtimes would come, then the Epicureans had to rely on the Stoics for their provisions. And so we're seeing that kind of thing now. Everybody is like running out and getting toilet paper and getting stocking up on wine and doing a lot of this other stuff. And the Stoics will already have had that stuff taken care of.
So what do you do to pivot if you're someone who's been more of an Epicurean up to this point?
Yeah,
how do you rebalance?
it is tough. I will say, because who you are fundamentally. I mean, you're probably the same as you were at 3 years old. However, I believe behaviors can be taught, and the first thing you have to do, and every military drill sergeant will tell you, is physically you have to change your routine. Okay. Maybe you're an Epicurean that didn't believe in hard exercise or physical work. Okay. Especially now. I don't care if you go out in the yard and do a figure eight for 45 minutes to an hour and come back and journal about it. I guarantee you do that for 28 straight days, and you're going to have a different perspective and a different set of habits. So it starts with the physical piece, and then it kind of goes into what it is that you put in your mind, and that's where you start reading about people who've made the transition or doing things that you want to do, or people that you admire. And then if you do that long enough, then you'll start getting a new vision for yourself. So if it comes down to three things: frequency, how often you do it, okay, then intensity, what stamp, most people think intensity is how hard you're doing something, but it's really the aesthetic that you put on your work. What stamp do you put on your work that makes what you do unique? Okay. And then after that, that's when you get a vision. And most people want to go the other way around. Oh, I've got this big vision and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do all these things. And pretty soon you're going to get tired. You've heard me talk about the heart popper before. That's what we talk about, the heart popper. You get a big vision, you run out there and you start doing all this stuff real fast, and doing like that, and sooner or later you think you're going to get there, but really all you're doing is wearing yourself out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, the tendency to just go all in on something that's arbitrary without really having established where you're at and what your priorities are.
Absolutely. That's the toughest thing, especially for those of us who are quote unquote educated. We've been taught that we can do anything, and yet certain challenges are technical, or you can just be able to pick up the phone, write a check, send in your debit card, and your answer comes to you. But most of the time, when you're talking about transformation, you're talking about adaptive challenges, and those are a lot more complicated, and they take a lot more both concentration and development work in order for you to make the kind of changes. And people confuse adaptive challenges with technical challenges and vice versa. I've been working with a lot of people that have gotten very good grades all throughout high school and college, and they always they tend to go into professions that there is hopefully a right answer. Okay. And so they like to have that certainty of the right answer, but they don't know how to get to the right answer unless they have the formula in front of them. But for you to develop your own formula and then come up with your right answer, that's adaptive. And that's where most people have to do the work. That's where I have to do the work. And it can be adaptive in a technical format. For example, before this virus came, I was going to go to South Africa and go on safari. I didn't know anything about digital photography, so I signed up for a class. I didn't even have a camera, so I went to the pawn shop and bought a camera. I saw a camera that my daughter had, and I think, okay, I could ask her a lot of questions and stuff like that. Once I got this digital camera in and went to one class, I realized how lost I was going to be if I didn't adaptively start trying to learn this, go out and take pictures, do all those kinds of things. And they were saying, take 40 pictures a day. And I'm going, I can't even see how to get the lens cap off. So, but I did, and after about 6-7 weeks, Yeah, I was actually feeling pretty good about my skills, and I would probably give myself a C minus right now in terms of my ability to use all the bells and whistles on my camera. But the fact is, it was an adaptive challenge for me to get to a C minus. Now, if I'm going to get any better, I've got to take it to another level. Unfortunately, they've canceled my trip, and so I'm kind of frustrated by the whole thing. But
That's
I'm
okay.
better at digital photography.
Yeah, it was a forcing function, right? The trip was a forcing.
Absolutely, that's it. And yet these things are still voluntary. Nobody told me I needed a camera. I could use my iPhone. But this is something that I knew over time that I would really want to at least learn the rudiments of, and so this was a forcing function, as you say, to get me to learn it.
There's two other things I was hoping while I still have you to share with folks. One is inversion or inverting, because maybe you're one of the best in the world at this topic, and then separately something that we've talked a fair amount about as well, which is kind of group indexing versus personal indexing, which are some of the things you've indirectly talked about thus far. So whichever one, if it's okay with you, we could touch on those before you
Okay.
get off the
Well,
phone.
let's see if I can do the group indexing first, just because that's a real important piece to me. I was reading a book called The End of Average, and they basically said most people, um, regardless of profession, look at where the average is or within the 2 standard deviations of that. And if you're not in there, then there's something wrong with you. And yet they don't take where you are first, your measurements, and say, where are you based on your own standards? What is your blood pressure based on what it's been all of your life? They looked at me and said, hey, you're an African American, you got high blood pressure. I'm going to give you this dosage of blood pressure medicine. And it was the lowest dose that they could give me. And I'm walking around almost fainting because this dosage is about to kill me. And I'm trying to take this because they said I'm in the high risk group. I was at a higher risk taking the medicine because they didn't know who I was. And so that's the same thing you have to do in a lot of areas is you can't take what the group norms are and say that I'm going to live those out. Because what tends to happen is it doesn't take you individually under consideration. Okay. And as it relates to inversion, this is something that I got from Charlie Munger, who is the second in charge at Berkshire Hathaway and the person who actually hired Warren Buffett. And he's what, 96, 97 years old now. And he talks about when the answers aren't forthcoming, okay, that's when you flip the script. That's when you invert the paradigm. And I'll tell you, if you can learn to do that and you know when to do it, it happens in just about everything. I was watching some of the XFL football games, and you could see they had the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator, and they let you listen to them, and you could see how they countered each other. When one thought they were going to go one way, the other one would flip the script. So if they thought you were going to pass, then they ran the ball. Or if they thought you were going to pass outside, they passed inside. And it was like a cat and mouse game. But all the time, what you're looking at is, am I not getting the results that I want? Then let's invert this. Let's flip it. And when you can do that successfully, all kinds of great things happen because you're going to put in the work. That presupposes everything. You're going to work hard. Now you need to work smart. And that's what we try to teach people.
Do you have any examples that you would feel comfortable sharing of times that you've executed on the inversion?
Oh, yes, it's interesting because, for example, the last 2 years, we've been working with people whose businesses are being displaced by gentrification. And so many people were thinking that it was inevitable. And so they were trying to find new locations. I said, no, stay in place. And what we're going to find are new types of investment vehicles for you to stay. And in one case, and it's been fairly prominent, it's been on TV and stuff, but we were able to get a barber $250,000 to stay where he is, a barber. Never even had anything but a cash business before. But by looking at how things are usually done and then flipping that and saying, yes, we can go to either equity markets, grants, we could go to different investors, even looking at things like high yield bonds, junk bonds, all that kind of stuff, and then applying those to people that are right there in the neighborhood. That's flipping the script. That's inverting.
Yeah, and I know of other scenarios too, or close friend of mine and someone who you've worked with over the years who decided to, in his early 30s, decided to leave private equity and go back to try to get into med school. And so non-conventional applicant, most of these applicants are folks coming right out of undergrad or a year or two out of undergrad, not someone who already has a JD MBA and super successful in private equity in their early 30s with their married with a young kid going into med school and then getting into one of the top programs in the country.
Absolutely.
And so I know you worked with him closely on how to position himself appropriately. That's an inversion example, right?
Oh, definitely. The great thing about that, knowing that he had an unconventional background, I told him that we were going to make his the essays, the applicant essays, we were going to make them funny, put funny captions on them or tell funny stories and stuff like that, because I knew that everybody else was going to try and play it straight and say how good they were at being a doctor or potential doctor and how good they were in physics or something like that. And I had him saying funny things and things about his profession that wasn't medical related or medically related. But I also had him drive 5 hours to Grand Coulee to be part of a little clinic down there, because I knew that the University of Washington likes to serve these place-bound patients and things like that. So I had him drive one way 5 hours, okay, and back 5 hours just to experience that. And when he told about the experience during his interviews, they said that's what got him in. Okay, I knew nobody else would do that, so we inverted that, and it worked. Tell the funny stories, but show how dedicated you are by going 5 hours one way. And he never even took a class outside of Bellevue College, all his prerequisites. And yet he ended up being one of the top students at UW. See, trying to go the orthodox route for a lot of people listening to this, it's killing you, okay, literally and figuratively. And you just got to think different. Not think differently, think different, like the Apple thing says.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I guess any parting words or anything you would want to share as we wrap up?
Well, I just thank you for allowing me to share, and hopefully somebody can benefit from all the mistakes that I've made in my life and that I'm still trying to overcome. I like to go to the Fred Meyer on Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month. They have discounts for older people. And somebody looked at me and said, "You don't look 55." And I said, "Well, what I would do to be 55 again, and the mistakes I made at 55." And this lady came and said, "You were making mistakes at 55?" I said, "Ma'am, I'm still making them." Okay. True. All right. Appreciate you.
All right. You too, Randy.
Okay.
I got a couple things to share with you that I'll send separately, but thanks for coming on.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Randy, thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Thanks everyone for tuning in. All right. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.